Thank you. Well, welcome. This is the 125th anniversary of New York Law School, and it happens to be the 125th breakfast, City Law breakfast. And I welcome all of you. I'm Ross Sandler. I am delighted to be the professor and director of the Center for New York City Law. You don't have to go. Are you going to sit right now? Okay. Our panel's assembling. Yeah, well, I always like to end at 9:30, so we're going to get everything going here. This is the 125th breakfast, and if you look at the program, you can see all the people who have spoken at these breakfasts, and it's a wonderful list. About 40 or 50 of them on our website, and others we're going to get on our website after we can get them off of video and all 2-inch tape and all the other things. The cover is of Civic Fame. Civic Fame is the statue, 25 feet high, gilded, that sits atop the municipal building. And today we're going to inaugurate Civic Fame Awards, and we're going to do that after the panel. So I feel very lucky to have been here for 20 years. I see some of the people who I think probably were at the very first breakfast that we did 20 years ago. And I thank you for coming and supporting all of these over the years. Now I'm going to turn it over to our Dean and President, Anthony Crowell.
Thank you, Ross, and congratulations. Just a quick toast to Ross Sandler and the Center for New York City Law on its 20th anniversary. And there is Alice Sandler, our hostess and co-anchor. Congratulations on creating something that is memorable and extraordinary, and we look forward to the next 20 years of your enduring legacy. It's pretty incredible. So this morning, it is great to see so many old friends and supporters as we mark this 20th anniversary and celebrate the center and Ross's legacy. He's one that he's still building here at the law school. And as we celebrate Civic Fame, and just a few minutes ago as I was walking here, I passed by Civic Fame, and I thought it was a momentous sight for me to see as we're kicking off this anniversary celebration. I'm not sure if you all realize this. Today's May 1st, and it's National Law Day, where we celebrate the rule of law. This is kind of interesting. I like to think that every day here at the law school is Law Day, but I can't think of a better way to celebrate Law Day than by marking the 20th anniversary of the Center for New York City Law and thinking about the incredible amount of thought leadership and critical resources that this center has brought to the city's legal community and beyond. The city is so fortunate to have the Center for New York City Law, and the center has been so fundamental to why we call ourselves New York's Law School. As Ross said, as we celebrate this 20th anniversary, we're also celebrating the law school's 125th anniversary, also known as our Quasquicentennial celebration. And just say that really quickly. And we are making sure that we showcase how New York Law School has been responsible for helping to build New York and shape the world. And this is very exciting for us. And we've done so. We have many former students of the law school who've gone on to hold high office in the city. We've had 3 mayors in order: Jimmy Walker, John Perroy Mitchell, and George McClellan. Jimmy Walker, for better or for worse, he did create a full employment program for those of us who were ethics attorneys. I mean, I'm looking at Wayne Hawley, there's a little something, and certainly we like to go to Walker's, which is in the shadow of the law school, quite ironically, just down the street. But we also have Senator Robert Wagner, Congressman Eliot Engel, current Staten Island Borough President Jimmy Otto, and former Borough President Guy Molinari, numerous judges, including Judge Fabiola Soto, large numbers of government officials, including BSA Vice Chair Susan Hinkson, who's here today, Jerry Crotty, who is our Vice Chair of our Board of Trustees, who's here, and who was Secretary to Governor Cuomo. And, of course, former Deputy Chancellor in the Department of Education, Kathleen Grimm, who sadly passed away this February, but whose memory we honor every day here at the law school, and we miss her greatly. I also think that New York Law School has among the highest, if not the highest, representation of graduates who serve as assistant corporation counsels at the city's law department. Pretty impressive. And certainly given our proximity to the city's Civic Center, given that we're around the corner from most government agencies and the courts, I can't think of any better place to have the Center for New York City Law than right here at New York Law School. And really, from the outset, it's been a place for substantive discussions to keep track of important developments happening throughout government. And through Ross's careful leadership, the center has always maintained a neutral stance on the issues, and that's been essential to gaining the trust of public officials who have spoken at the breakfasts and for agencies who have provided their decisions for public distribution by the center. It's hard to believe that 20 years ago, no other place existed like this, and that we've really created such a legacy here. The signature City Law Breakfast, of which this is our 125th, coincidentally with our 125th anniversary, as Ross said, it's a rare venue where those with significant influence can interact with an informed audience and engage in thoughtful, probing, and unfiltered dialogue. Just think about a couple months ago with U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara and his 3-minute-a-room speech. We launched quite a civic dialogue there. The center, we should also mention, releases 2 regularly scheduled publications that are on the desks of many attorneys and public officials inside and outside of government, City Law and City Land, and we also send out City Regs, which is a biweekly update on proposed rules and notices of public hearings. And we're really proud that much of that work product is written by our students and our graduate fellows. And certainly the center has been an innovator in government transparency, putting online many agency decisions long before nyc.gov was as robust and open as it is today. And today, our city admin website, as we call it, hosts 115,000 decisions from 28 agencies, and it is one of the most heavily accessed sites on all of the law school's webpage. Let's also mention one other thing, that City Law is very significant in that we host our annual citywide ethics seminar with the Conflicts of Interest Board, and that is coming up in just a few weeks on May 20th. And as we said, we have Jimmy Walker to thank for the permanent employment program. So if you have to ask what drove the center to be as innovative and ahead of its time, the answer would inevitably and invariably be Ross Sandler. He's been the beating heart, the creator, and the driving force behind everything the center's done, and he's continued to stay true to his original vision while continuing to expand the center's offerings, and he's such a leader within our New York Law School community. He's made the Center for New York City Law one of the most visible centers at any of the law schools in the New York City area, and we're incredibly proud of it. His professional accomplishments are really as impressive as they are long. As many of you know, he was an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District, serving as the chief appellate attorney and chief for environmental enforcement. He went on to join the Koch administration as special advisor to the mayor, and eventually was appointed as commissioner of the Department of Transportation, an agency that still benefits from his vision and policy accomplishments decades later. And after he finished his time in government and before he joined the law school, he had a stellar career in private practice. And now as a senior professor here, he is someone who engages in robust dialogue and thought leadership, and he is our go-to expert on everything New York City government. So he is urbane, he is soulful, he's passionate and wise, and it's all true, and he's been a wonderful guide, friend, and mentor to many, especially me. And he's a believer in the value and dedication of those who work in government. And the center has showcased the important and complex work that government attorneys do and the positive impact that they have on the public. And all of us here are, or almost all of us here, have been public sector attorneys and can relate to the importance of that mission. For me, I don't think I would be standing here as dean without Ross. Ross brought me to the law school in 2003 to teach a seminar on city law that opened up amazing opportunities not only for students at the law school to enter public service and understand the critical roles that government attorneys play, but gave me an opportunity to be here and to celebrate today as dean, so I really appreciate that and I'm grateful for that. I also want to mention that we have to give enormous credit to these breakfasts to Alice Sandler. And the amazing impact she's had on the law school and the center over the center's lifespan, and I call her a dedicated co-anchor of this program. And she has an incredible love for the city, for the school, and our students, and for all of you. So thank you. So today we're incredibly honored to be joined by 4 current and former corporation counsels, Fritz Schwartz, Judge Paul Crotty, Michael Cardozo, and Zach Carter, and whose presence today speaks to the meaningful partnership the center has forged with city government. And with that, I want to turn the microphone back over to Ross. Ross?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Let me just say thank you to Anthony Crowell, who has been a wonderful dean and supporter of this. To him. But he didn't tell me he was going to speak that long, so so we're going to go right to the panel. Fritz, you're on.
Okay, so I've been asked to moderate with my friends and colleagues here. And in the first question, I'm going to go with the person who was first in the job, and then, Zach, you can come at the end, because frankly, the question's hardest for you, I think.
Oh, great.
And just because of chronology, it's hardest for you. The issue that they asked me to ask first is, what important issue was there when you were corporation counsel that is no longer an issue?
Well, before I answer that question, Fritz, and I point out to everybody I'm not under oath, I think the best decision I ever made as a corporation counsel was the decision 20 years ago to make Jeff the first assistant corporation counsel. That's a decision I think that has stood the test of time. I went through my records to catalog some of the things that the law department was intimately involved in, which demonstrates the strength of the law department. I would say the merger of the Housing Authority and Transit Authority Police into the NYPD was one of the signal accomplishments achieved very early on in the Giuliani administration. The reason I cite to that is because the memo that provided the architecture and the draft action plan for the merger was written by Paul Riefin in 1986 in a memo that he sent to you, because back in 1986, Mayor Koch wanted to merge the transit police with the NYPD, and there was a question about whether you could do this under the civil service law. Well, Paul Riefin found a way to accomplish that, and that was the plan that we followed, and it was a great success. A great success because, you know, when they had the housing police and the transit police, each of those agencies was a separate agency, had its own superstructure, its own administrative, recruiting, disciplinary units, and there was an awful lot of redundancies. As a matter of fact, I used to point out when I argued the case in the appellate division that we even had 4 bagpipe bands. So the net effect was there was about 5,000 redundancies. So without any further expenditure of money, we had 5,000 more police to put on the street, and I think that was a major thing. The other thing that I'm very proud of, because it was an interdisciplinary approach, and it saved the city an awful lot of money, is the filtration avoidance agreement. Remember, the federal government was concerned about the watershed west of the Hudson, and their proposal was to install a filtration plant, which would have cost, at that time, $8 to $10 billion. But the way things go today, we'd still be building it, and the cost would still be running. But we were able to come up with a program working with environmental law, Jeff, of course, the legal counsel division, contracts and real estate, environmental law, I said that, DEP, and then everybody who was affected by the watershed. Now, this is a very difficult thing. You know, you wonder why people upstate dislike New Yorkers so much. You know, you go to the Adirondacks and they can't build in the Adirondacks because it's forever wild. You go into our watershed, you can't develop in our watershed because that's where our water comes from. The people in the southern interior of New York are still upset about fracking because they look at this as an opportunity for them to advance economically. And that was the same way. We were greeted with an awful lot of hostility. And Marilyn Gelber at DEP, Elizabeth St. Clair at the Law Department did a terrific job in tamping down that opposition. So those are two. I have many more that I could list. But I know others have other things that they'd like to say, so.
Thank you, Paul. Michael?
Well, I find this a particularly difficult question. What is a problem that I dealt with that is no longer with us? Perhaps since Paul was Corporation Counsel a number of years ago, some of those problems are behind. But at one level, the issues continue in the sense that the law department continues, and I think we'd all agree, with the highest quality lawyers, dedicated lawyers imaginable. And while the structure may have slightly changed, the responsibilities, be it in the corporate and economic development area or in the defense of litigation area or affirmative litigation, obviously continue. And in part, the priorities reflect the priorities of the particular mayor. As everyone knows, Bloomberg was particularly interested in public health issues. I'm very proud of the efforts that the law department did to help him in those areas, the smoking ban, the calorie disclosures. We had a little setback on big drinks, but that's obviously Zach's fault because I've lost in the Court of Appeals. There's some issue about taxis that seems to be continuing. So in part, it reflects the priorities of the mayor. Obviously, Bloomberg, you think about the gun issues, which were unfortunately still with us as a country, but we made progress. And then as I thought about this, I first thought there is one issue that I dealt with that is behind us. But in another way, it's not. It's hard to believe, given where we are today, that I guess 9 years ago, on a Friday afternoon, I was advised that a judge in the New York State Supreme Court had declared the New York State law prohibiting gay marriage unconstitutional. The law department represented the city clerk, who had refused to give a marriage license. And what was it for the Corporation Counsel's office to do? As I assume most people in this room would know, since there's an automatic stay given to the City of New York if you file a notice of appeal. If I filed a notice of appeal, then obviously the decision would not go into effect until the appellate courts had decided. On the other hand, the mayor was a very outspoken advocate in favor of gay marriage, as I was personally. What was the role of the Corporation Counsel of the City of New York when faced with the question of whether or not to file a notice of appeal? I filed a notice of appeal amid some criticism. And fast forward another year, the law department won 4-3 in the New York Court of Appeals, in which the New York Court of Appeals held the gay marriage law was not, the gay marriage prohibition was not unconstitutional. Obviously, at least in New York, that issue is behind us in the constitutional sense. Not clear what the Supreme Court is obviously going to do. But as I thought about this a little more, the issue that I struggle with about whether or not I should file a notice of appeal is a recurrent and I think critically important issue that the law department and I think most government lawyers deal with every day, which is, and this is the wrong place to go into it at length, but who is your client? Fritz has written about this, I've written about it, Jeff has written about it. What do you do? Who's your boss? You could go on and on. There was, I think I recently read that the law department settled for relative peanuts a tragic case where an ambulance had been late to pick someone else up. There was a lawsuit, but there was no special duty, for those of you know, so basically the plaintiff got nothing. What is the role of the government lawyer in those kind of cases? It's a critically important issue, and so I think to conclude in a slightly different way that Paul did, individual cases I had lots of. Look at the economic development projects, be it the High Line or Brooklyn Bridge Park. A lot of those issues are behind us, but there's new economic development projects. There's new issues about defensive lawsuits. And so on the whole, I would say the particular issue may be different, but the macro issues remain the same.
Great. Zach?
Zach, of course, has no problems.
We have, exactly. We've solved them all in a year and a half. I mean, obviously, I've had the shortest tenure of my colleagues, having started with the change of administration. And a lot of the issues have a long tail. They are ongoing, matters of ongoing concern. This is having started with a change of the first change of administration that had occurred for 12 years. That signals, or could signal, a profound change in direction in matters affecting so much of what happens in the city, and particularly the relationship between the city and public and private institutions, the city and individuals, and some of those were reflected in the way that long-standing litigation matters have been handled, whether it's the issues of stop and frisk or the long-standing litigation in connection with discrimination and hiring at the fire department, ongoing litigation and discussions about reform of corrections. These are all matters that are affected by the change in course that was occasioned by the election of a new mayor. I mean, under this mayor, we view most things through the prism of income inequality. And that acts itself out in so many different ways. The relationship between police and citizens, the allocation of resources in public education, and in many of these areas, the law department has to provide the legal architecture that supports these new policy directions of a new mayor. To the extent that there are concerns about income inequality, what is the role of government, and particularly city government, in trying to correct the chasm that has grown between those who are very, very well off and those who have been neglected for one reason or another by both the system and the economy. So a lot of what we are doing now is frankly just providing the legal architecture to support an evolving set of programs that reflect the mayor's income inequality agenda.
So, Ross, by the way, I want to echo the comments about Jeff Friedlander, who was a hero when I was there and has been ever since, and also thank this law school and Ross and Dean Crowell very much. Ross said I could comment on my colleagues' answers, and I'll just have two brief ones. One is that the law department people think of mainly as dealing with litigation, but it does an enormous amount of other work. And just taking on the gay rights question, while the marriage issue was not really at the top of the table when I was there, the issue of discrimination against gays was, and the law department had an enormous effect on rewriting the bill that had failed for like 30 years to get the city council to pass it and to leave New York City as the leader in municipal or national governments in acting against prejudice against gays. And then I want to pick up on a little bit of Michael's point about whether to appeal. And it is a very interesting issue. Sometimes it's really for the Corporation Council alone to decide. Sometimes you have to talk about it with the mayor. And I'm a great fan of what Ed Koch was as a client for several of us. And we had an issue when there was a consent decree that prohibited overcrowding in Rikers Island. And Judge Lasker, the lovely federal district judge who was responsible for that decree, ultimately held the city in contempt and issued as his remedy that a number of prisoners would have to be released from Rikers Island. A terrible situation for the mayor to face. You know, you can imagine all the headlines in the Post when it happened. So Len Kerner, then the head of the appeals division and also a great hero of the law department, came to me and said, you know, if we appeal this case, the Second Circuit is going to know we're appealing only so they can be blamed for the release. In other words, Len said, we're sure to lose. And what the Second Circuit is going to say is the city knew it was sure to lose, appealed to make us take the blame for the release. So we argued this in front of Koch, and I pushed Len's position, and all the other significant city officials said to Koch, don't do it. Of course you should appeal. He said, I've heard the argument. I agree with Fritz and Len. We're not going to appeal. But that was an example, I think, of an unusually receptive client, and we've all had good clients. So let me now pose another question to the three of you. All have had experience both in the public sector, in some cases many times, in your case, Michael, really one time, but very long. So how would you articulate the differences between public practice and private practice? So let's go in reverse order and start with you, Zach, first.
Sure. This is not a new discussion for Michael and myself, and I think to the largest extent that we tend to overlap. And I began to think about the special role of government lawyers when I was U.S. Attorney, and I had both obviously a criminal division and a civil division, and the civil division was a very small microcosm of the City Corporation Counsel's office. I believe that we, like all lawyers, whether in public or private practice, owe a duty to provide zealous representation to our clients, and particularly in litigation. We are obliged, for the best interest of the city, to assert available claims and defenses so that we can defend the city's interests and that of its agencies and employees. But we bring and we defend cases in the name of the people of the city of New York. And because of that, I believe that we are in gentle conflict in many, if not most, of our cases, because our adversaries, the folks on the other side of the V, are more often than not some subset of our client group, some individual citizen of New York, or some business, or some organization. And consequently, I don't believe that we should ever be indifferent to the fairness of the ultimate result. And I think that's different than the responsibility of a lawyer in private practice. In private practice, at least my experience with my clients is not that they necessarily want justice, they want advantage. And that's okay. And obviously we have an obligation to defend advantages that are deserved by the city. But we also have an obligation to recognize that it is important for the city that its citizens view the government operations as fair. And so I do think that the responsibilities of government counsel are distinguishable from that of someone in private practice.
Well, I think you have to look at it both what you're doing in a litigation, what you're doing externally in a litigation, and internally in terms of the kinds of things Fritz was talking about private advice to a client. And I think Zach and my differences may just be around the edges. I think clearly in the public external way, when you're handling a litigation, it is your job to defend your client to the hilt. And if someone has missed the statute of limitations by 1 day, I think it is absolutely the responsibility of the Corporation Counsel's Office to say that that case should be dismissed. And that's what the law is, and I think you're not doing a good job if you do otherwise. Internally, and I think this is where private and public advice may differ, I think the story Fritz just told could be repeated, perhaps not quite as dramatically, time and again. The Corporation Counsel has a perspective on the public policy issues, most of which end up as a legal issue one way or another. And he or she must strongly advocate, no matter how much all, particularly the politicians around you, disagree. Privately, you have to say to the mayor, look, I think we can win this case, but wouldn't this be a better result? Wouldn't this public policy result be a better place? Let's not even start this public policy. Let's tweak it both to avoid the litigation problems and maybe to make it fairer. The Corporation Counsel who doesn't have the guts to say that isn't worth his or her salt. You have to do that. That said, now moving back into the perhaps litigation context, there's something else that I found very important. Someone brings a case against the city, a typical tort or a particular constitutional claim, police roughed me up or something like that. And you know that it's more likely than not that if you take it all the way, you're going to win. But there's a certain appeal. If the Corporation Counsel's Office settles for relative peanuts cases it thinks it can win 9 times out of 10, you're sending a troublesome message, in my view, because you're bringing out more and more and more of these cases that it's going to cost, because of the volume, it's going to cost the city lots of money. So in my view, in those cases, while you should never hesitate to settle if you think the factors are such that you should settle, I think it's a mistake for the Corporation Counsel's Office not to litigate where it thinks it can win because of the additional factor that otherwise you're probably in the long run going to cost the city more money because more of these cases come in.
I come at this from a slightly different perspective because of all the corporation counsels who are here, I was the only one who was a client of the city's Corporation Counsel's Office before I became the Corporation Counsel. And I came to appreciate in a very deep and very respectful way the capabilities of the law department, their ability to pose an issue and to put up multiple strategies for resolving that issue. You know, in New York City, we have terrible problems of income diversity, income disparity, I should say. We speak 183 different languages. We're a continuing immigration absorption center. We have all kinds of problems, and those problems will continue with healthcare, education, policing, housing. The spectrum goes on and on forever. And there was a time when the Corporation Counsel's Office was more political, but during the days of Alan Schwartz and Ed Koch, they revised the structure of the law department, their hiring practices. That was continued then by Fritz and Peter Zimroth and Victor Kovner and Peter Sherwood and Paul Crotty and Michael Hess and Michael Cardozo and now Zach Carter. And so you have a cadre of extraordinarily talented people who are not only good lawyers, but are interested in public service and trying to find solutions that makes the city a better place in which to live and to raise our families. So I think there are difficulties. There's always going to be litigation because if you read your de Tocqueville, you'll find that even back in the 19th century, de Tocqueville said, there's very few social problems in America. We like litigation. Very few problems that exist in our society don't stay out of courts very long. They're always in the courts. And sometimes they expect a judicial answer. Sometimes it's for publicity and so forth. But the lawyers at the Corporation Council are sensitive to this variety of approaches and are in a position to give good, solid, capable advice. And Mayor Dinkins is here. I know that Mayor Koch and Mayor Giuliani and Mayor Bloomberg, and I'm sure Mayor de Blasio appreciates the advice they're getting from the law department. They give them the policy is set by the elected official. Its implementation and the legal advice that goes with implementing a policy comes from the law department, and it's always been neutral, objective, fair, and balanced. And I think that's a real strength of the law department. So it all started with Alan Schwartz, and it's been continued by every single corporation council and every single mayor since then. So it's really a tremendous tribute to the leadership of the city, but also to the men and women of the law department.
You know, Paul, the client, you, and the Corporation Council, me, can do things sort of not as a conspiracy, but allied together. You wanted more agents to enforce the city tax law.
Correct.
And we were looking at we were looking at a lot of cases, particularly in the real estate area, and saw that it would be helpful to have more agents in the finance department. So you can make a little alliance that helps get good things done.
The story that I remember, Fritz, is that when I became the Commissioner of Finance, I was told the computer was broken, where we're not going to be able to get out the real property tax bills in January. So I said I had the answer. Why don't we have IBM come in and rebuild our system? And you said no.
Yeah, and I don't know why you told me that before. I don't remember it. And I don't know why it was.
You were backed up by Evan Davis, too. It's pretty obvious that you look back on it in hindsight, it was an obvious conflict. We eventually got Arthur Anderson to come in and retool our computer. I bet you're still using the same computers. we do this once every 30 or 40 years, whether we have to or not.
And we're going to, you know. I wanted to make a comment, have one more general question, and then open it up to the audience. I think of my own question in terms of pleasures as a lawyer, and in some ways, the private practice pleasures and the public lawyer pleasures are the same. I think in terms of using your craft, you know, you get pleasure both sides. In terms of helping people, you do too. I mean, obviously you're helping huge numbers of people. You can in the city job. You help individuals too. I mean, when Ed Koch was beleaguered by the Giuliani's efforts to say there was corruption and going in effect after Koch, who was extremely honest, he was very troubled, and helping him as a person was very, made me happy. The same way, though, that helping Tom Watson, the head of IBM, when the government was trying to break up IBM, helped me as a person, made me feel good as a person. But the one thing that's really different is the opportunity to make a difference in the public life, and that you can definitely do when you're a government lawyer. Now, the one subject I'd like us to focus on a little bit is a highly current one, which is the relationship between the police and particularly the black community, but citizens in general. So that's an issue which has been with us forever, and certainly was an issue during all of our jobs as Corporation Council. So what observations, and I'm going to start on this one again with you, Paul, what observations do you have about that huge national problem from the perspective of New York City when you were in the job?
I've always thought the city did a very poor job in terms of, we have an awful lot of data on policing and 1983 actions where citizens complain about the police treatment during the course of an arrest. They were abusive, they used excessive force and so forth. There's all kinds of data on this. How did it happen? Where did it happen? What precincts? But we don't have, the city has CompStat, but we don't gather statistics, at least they didn't do it when I was there, statistics on where these incidents were occurring. And I think it's a basic tool of risk management, that this data ought to be harvested, it ought to be collected, it ought to be analyzed the way they do with crime statistics, so that you could find out where there is a problem and how that problem is going to be monitored. Now, the police resist this. They did, when I was the corporation counsel, they said it was unnecessary. Maybe Zach will have better luck. But, you know, the police are interested. When you get a call from the district attorney's office, the police always respond to that. When you get a call from the corporation counsel's office, they're not so quick to respond because they're on the other side of the equation, they're on the other side of the V. So I think that one of the things that I regret was we didn't do a better job of harvesting this data, integrating it with CompStat, and doing a better job of risk management, analyzing the problems, where they occur, what kinds of incidents occur. Now, you know, this is a major problem in the city of New York. For example, I looked at my docket the other day in connection with coming over here. About 25% of the cases that I have on my docket are 1983 cases. Now, say half from police, half from corrections. And I'm not unique in this. This is approximately the workload of every district court judge in the Southern District of New York would have 20 to 25% of their cases being 1983 cases. So it's a major problem. It's not analyzed. It's not carefully scrutinized, and it should be. Hopefully that'll yield a more positive approach to policing in our communities. Now, some of the police do terrific jobs. You know, they're out there and they meet with the parish, or the precinct council and the community groups, and they do a great job, but they could do better.
Michael.
Well, I first want to say that I'm sure Paul's statistics may well be right. One of the initiatives, and I think perhaps one of the benefits of some people from the Corporation Counsel's office graduating to something even more higher position, such as a judge in the Southern District, is that under Paul's leadership, the Southern District has created rules that benefit both the plaintiff and defense bar in terms of disposing much more rapidly of 1983 cases. And I think that's been a great advance. We'd like to keep the volume of cases much lower, but if we have whatever volume we have, I think is being handled more efficiently thanks to some of the initiatives that Paul has led as a judge. I would take issue with one thing, at least by the time I left the Corporation Counsel's office. I think we were, and Zach can talk about where we are now, the data is being more effectively gathered. The question is what you do with the data once you have it. Because it's great to have all the theories in the world about where the problem, which precincts, which policemen are problems and so forth, but if you don't do something with it, then obviously it's an issue. As people know, I was in the middle of the controversy on the stop and frisk issues before Judge Shindlin, and then in the Second Circuit. It was a very difficult time, and obviously events over the last year and a half, particularly the last 6 months, have made it even more difficult. And certainly, we now have this as a national issue, certainly we as a society, and certainly true in New York, and the Corporation Counsel's office should play a major role of how do we deal with these issues? How do you deal with risk management, not just to keep the amount of money the city of New York is going to write a check for, but much more importantly, as a societal matter, we have to do a better job for people the police and the minority communities to get along better to avoid these things from happening.
Zach?
Sure. I guess addressing first the relationship between the police and communities of color. It's not strictly a legal issue. All right, it's as much sociological and political as legal. I think that there was over the years, over the past decade or so, an absence of real communication between communities of color and the leadership of the city that could help decision makers understand from the vantage point of people who are living in struggling communities and happen to be of color what it is like to be over-policed. I was a vice chair of a police-on-police shootings task force that was established by then Governor David Patterson that arose out of two separate incidents in which African-American police officers who were in civilian clothes were killed by other responding officers. One incident occurred in Harlem and the other in White Plains. And we held hearings around the state in connection with those and did a lot of interviews with police officers of color who, when they took their uniforms off, were as much subject to police action as anyone else. And their stories were very, very telling. And I, during the course of the hearings, shared my own story. And this happened about 5 years ago. I'm telling my age. And I said that I'm a 60-year-old man and that I still reflexively cling to my store receipts when I'm in a pharmacy or a neighborhood store or the grocery store out of a lifetime residual concern that I might be challenged as a shoplifter. All right? And not everybody has to live that way. And I think that the leadership of the city didn't fully appreciate when they heard the hue and cry coming from minority communities about the impact on stop and frisk on the dignity of citizens who lived in these communities, because there was a failure to recognize that they were rubbing salt in an open wound. That when you have 700,000 stops, you know, more than 90% yielding no contraband or probable cause to arrest, that's a lot of what turned out to be false accusations for people who are used to being subject to false accusation. And I think that just providing that information to the city's leadership and to the police department's leadership has made a tremendous difference. I mean, there's a lot of controversy over the so-called broken windows approach to policing and quality of life policing. I mean, some of the people who the police department hears from most in terms of engaging in quality of life policing are communities of color, all right, who don't want to live in a NYCHA housing project where the common areas smell of urine, and don't want to live in an environment that feels like there's rampant disorder. But these same people also do not want to be treated any differently than they would be if they lived in a different neighborhood. I mean, I guess what I could say most vividly, I mean, someone who's black or Latino living in the South Bronx and sitting on their stoop and drinking a Corona shouldn't be any more likely to get a summons than a couple openly drinking a champagne toast while watching Shakespeare in the Park. And once you communicate those kinds of messages, and part of it is having a diverse city leadership so that people can share that kind of information, you see the light bulbs go on, and that kind of gets absorbed into the thinking. It doesn't mean that the policy is abandoned. It just means that it's informed by an understanding that it has to be applied fairly, and you have to send a signal out to throughout the command structure of the police department that you have to be sensitive to that, and that there's a greater emphasis as a result of these discussions about police officers using more discretion on the ground. Arrest is not always the solution, even serving a summons, but just stopping the offense with an admonition in certain circumstances is going to be sufficient. And a lot of the training going on at the police department now is around appropriately exercising that kind of discretion.
Rossi, I thought
Let me
you
just,
wanted
add
us to
one-
go
one-
until 9:30, but I misunderstood you then, I think.
Fritz, can I just say something in response to Zach? In my experience, both as a Commissioner of Housing and as a Corporation Counsel, what I found when I traveled in communities of color was the one thing that was more difficult than over-policing was under-policing. If you withdraw the police from these communities, you really have hell to pay in terms of allocation of the city's resources. You can talk about the housing authority developments. Those people want to be safe and secure and have their housing that is consistent with their goals and aspirations. You withdraw the police from these communities or tell them not to enforce the law, you're going to create a different problem, and just as serious in the other direction as the problem we're encountering now.
You
But
know,
you have to balance it.
If I can just answer that quickly. But what we have got to do in this area and a lot of others is to learn to walk and chew chewing gum at the same time.
I agree with that.
You also, the office has an opportunity to listen and understand patterns in the city and help the city recognize there are serious problems going on in certain departments. Again, I'll tell a very short story about how you could change a mayor's mind. When John Conyers was planning a police brutality series of hearings in New York, Ed Koch's first reaction was, "Ain't true, fight 'em back." And what I did is bring in all the major African-American officials in the Koch administration and had them each tell stories just like Josh's about what had happened to them and to their children. Completely changed Koch's remarks. He said, there isn't systemic police brutality, but there's far too much of it, and it's hurtful, and it ought to stop. So this office can make a huge difference by listening and helping mayors to listen. So, Russ, what should we do now? Finish. Okay.
That was an extraordinary panel. It shows how much you can accomplish in a short time. That was really extraordinary, and I appreciate the efforts of all of you. We've had a wonderful morning to be able to see the four wonderful corporation council together and thinking about common problems. This will be on our website, and I hope that current members and future members of the law department have a chance to see it and to think about these very tough issues that you are facing. Thank you so much.
So are we meant to leave, I assume?
You may sit in your soft chairs, or you may join us in the audience. I want to just thank a few people and also to acknowledge Mayor Dinkins. I didn't say acknowledge him earlier, but you're really graceful and wonderful to come, and we deeply appreciate your presence. There are many people in the audience I probably should recognize, but I do want to at least speak to elected officials. Richard Gottfried, where's Richard? Richard Gottfried is here, a longest-serving member of the State Assembly and a good and old friend, and thank you and welcome here. We also received a very nice complimentary letter from Mayor de Blasio, which I'm very grateful for, and we are going to award the Civic Fame Awards in just a minute, but I do want to thank the many people who worked so hard to put this together, particularly the staff of the center, Brian Kasuba, Lillian Valle Santiago, Jesse Deno, Mike Twomey, and then all the people at the law school, Nancy Guide and her staff, Regina Chung in particular, who designed the beautiful program, and then the people who worked so hard to make this a wonderful event and a beautiful room. And so we want to thank all of them. Now, we would like to present the three Civic Fame Awards. Anthony, will you come up and help? I want to call up Mary McCormick first. And that's the first thing. Mary, come on up. Good friend. Mary, graduate of Radcliffe, a master's, MA from NYU, MBA, and PhD from Columbia. She has been the longtime head of the Fund for the City of New York. The Ford Foundation created the Fund for the City of New York in 1968 with a mission to improve the quality of life for all New Yorkers. And the fund has focused in doing that on government and on nonprofits. And Mary's led the Fund for the City of New York since 1980s. And during her tenure, the Fund for the City of New York has been the gold standard of public philanthropy regarding New York City. And she played a pivotal role in the start of the center. I had worked with Mary McCormick first as a lawyer at the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Fund for the City of New York, and then in the city. And so when he started this, I said, I'm going to go see Mary first. So I went to see Mary, and I said, we need money. And she said, okay. She said, I will give you $5,000, but you can't have it now. She said, you'll get it later, but I'll give you something better. I'll let you go every place you go to ask money and to say that I am going to give you money and the fund is going to give you money. And that validated my ability to go to the other foundations. And with that, we raised the money to start City Law and all the other things that we've been able to do. The innovations of the Fund for the City of New York are many. Who could think of City without the Sloan Public Service Awards for 38 years, honoring the wonderful city employees, the incubator programs for starting nonprofits, the programs to help them do technology services. What's very meaningful to many, many are the economic support programs, $20 million of revolving funds, 400 not-for-profits need the money to meet demands, and they remain solvent because the Fund for the City of New York is there to help them do that. The internet, bringing internet to communities, all of this is under Mary's leadership at the Fund for the City of New York. She's the long-distance runner in city philosophy. There's no one else like her. For her leadership and civic accomplishments as president of the Fund for the City of New York, we, New York Law School and the Center for New York City Law, present to Mary McCormick the Civic Fame Award.
Well, this was really easy. Knowing Ross and how persistent he is, and how stubborn he is, and how when he gets an idea he's going to follow through on it, and our knowing how important what he was proposing was. It was easy to say that. But what we didn't realize when we did it was just how fabulous City Law, City Law would turn out to be, and then City Land. I know you all use these in government, but nonprofits and the community board members depend on it as well. It is excellent information, it's accessible, and it is in 2 documents that are beautifully designed, and that counts for a lot. Thank you.
Stanley Schuman. Another wonderful friend. Thank you. Harvard graduate, Harvard Law School, Harvard Business School, an important and successful investment banker, has been associated with Allen & Company since 1961. How many years has that been? Too many. Too many. Well, he's still there. He has been on numerous boards, corporate boards, and is a close and personal advisor and friend of Rupert Murdoch and the News Corporation, one of his longtime associations and clients. But most of all, he's one of those people that come into the city and help the city in so many ways. He's among the pillars of the business community who devote their skills not just to the private side, but to the governmental side. In the worst of times, in 1970s, when the city was on the rocks, bankruptcy, Stanley Schuman served on the Emergency Financial Control Board for 19 years, from 1977 to 1997. Those of us who remember it, the Emergency Financial Control Board controlled every expenditure of the city. It was the banker that said what the city could do and what it couldn't do. Stanley Schuman spent time on that and was part of that amazing effort by the business community to make sure the city survived as it should survive. The other awful time, 9/11, Stan came through then as well. He was became a member and director of the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, again helped the city through exceedingly difficult times. He has had other important civic engagements, Carnegie Hall, on board of trustee of Carnegie Hall, National Public Radio, WNET, Channel 13, president of the Wiltwyck School, one of the interesting sides of his personality to be a part of that and help in those school that had many difficulties. He served on the board of this law school, and as his term ended, we asked him if he would stay on and help the Center for New York City Law as the chair of the advisory council. And he did. And that association has been incredibly meaningful. In truth, without Stan's support and encouragement, we would never have had city law, city land, city admin, city regs, city law breakfasts, our CLEs on city government, and all the other programs that we've been able to do. He has been there. He has been the one who has backed us, been there for me and for the center and for the staff and the law school when we needed them. He loves politics. He loves New York City. One of the joys of this relationship is going up to Allen & Company, to the beautiful offices, I must say, nicer than mine, wonderful paintings on the wall, and we sit and we talk politics. And that was just wonderful, because here was a person who had many things to do, but was so interested in the city, so interested in what the Center for New York City Law was going to do, and had so much wise counsel on how we should do it and how we could help. For his leadership at the Center of New York City Law's Advisory Council, and for his lifetime of civic accomplishments, New York Law School and the Center for New York City Law proudly present Stanley Schuman with the Civic Fame Award.
Well, I was asked what I should speak about, and I was told about a minute and a half and sit down, so I'll make this very quick. The dean has told you everything about the Law Center that one could say, and it's just been a real privilege for me to work with Ross and Alice, both, because they work very much as a team. So we wrestle with the budget every year. It's very small. Ross does amazing things in his convening, the publications, and a real factor in the civic life of New York. And I just want to quote from an email of last year that Ross sent to me. He said, "I know that at some point both you and I will cease participating in this enterprise, but I'm not yet ready to stop." So, Ross, as long as you're here, I guess in the words of Neil Young, I'd rather burn out than rust out. So I'll be here as well. One more thing I'd like to mention. I'm really here because of a very close, passionate, generous, effective, and joyous person, Bernie Mendick, who I met on a ski slope about 50 years ago. We became fast friends. When he became chairman of the board of the law school, he asked me to join and work along with him. I did. He died about 14 years ago. He would be smiling down upon us, and I'm really here because of him, and I'd like you all to remember that. Thank you very much.
And now Jeffrey Friedlander. Many of your colleagues are here, and they're all smiling at you, too. Jeffrey, graduate of Hunter College, NYU Law School. He was recruited to the law department by Norman Redlick, who also held the position of first assistant. J. Lee Rankin was the corporation counsel, and Mayor Lindsay was the mayor. Jeff's lifetime client has been the city of New York. And that dedication has brought him opportunities to participate in the most interesting, a cornucopia of fabulous client matters for the city of New York. And some have already been mentioned. I thought it was wonderful that I had this list that I was going to say, and it turned out that Fritz and the others mentioned many of them as well. Jeff was involved with handling New York City's South African anti-apartheid legislation and divestiture. He was involved with expanding the landmark preservation law. He helped draft the gay rights bill. He was involved with establishing the Civilian Complaint Review Board. He drafted the New York City Watershed Protection Agreement, which Paul mentioned. He was involved with the consolidation of the Housing Authority, Transit Police, and the New York City into the NYPD, again, that Paul mentioned. He advised Lincoln Center development. He supervised the drafting of the executive orders that followed 9/11. He's involved with the community gardens litigation. These are all things that he puts on his resume and things that he worked on, but those of us who've worked with Jeff know that to be in the room with him and to discuss a legal matter and hear his careful response, his thoughtful response, quiet but so persuasive, he is an amazing he's in many ways the definition of what a counselor should be. It is a wonderful experience to think about a problem, a legal problem or a policy problem with Jeff Friedlander. You know that you'll get to the right result. You know that you're going to get the best of a wonderful, very robust legal mind. And now 44 years at the law department, 20 as first assistant, records of amazing accomplishment and amazing dedication to public service. For all of these civic accomplishments of 44 years with the law department, New York Law School and the Center for New York City Law proudly presents to Jeffrey Friedlander our Civic Fame Award. Thank you.
Well, it's my 20th anniversary as first assistant, and it's your 20th anniversary here at the center. I want to congratulate both of you. I think Anthony, our colleague, is doing a wonderful job here at the law school, and Ross, in putting this center together, has done a great service for the city of New York. City law, city land, the programs that we're pleased and honored to work with them in putting together on contracting, on ethics, on land use each year, as well as the fellows that are trained here and that we've been happy to been able to recruit over the years to join the law department. I know it's Anthony's goal to make New York Law School New York's law school. At least it says it on banners in the streets that we can see. But that's right. But certainly this center sort of puts them a giant step ahead in achieving that goal. I think the greatest thing about the center for me, though, are these programs. That there are many fora in New York City where you can nibble on food and hear distinguished speakers. But there's something special about this that keeps people coming here at 8:15 on Friday mornings. And I think what it really is that it's a sense of family here. It's a family gathering. Colleagues, former colleagues, people in and out of city government, people who work with city government, people who work in civic associations, people who care about New York City, gather here and are together. And Ross and Alice act as our gracious hosts, and it's just a wonderful thing. So I'm going to be retiring from the law department soon. 20 years as first assistant, 20 years for you in this program. I hope you continue. You better continue, because I'm going to be coming here as well in the years ahead. So thank you so much. Civic Fame. Thank you.
Well,
There's another little gift. We would like on behalf of the law school, we would like to present Ross Sandler with just a token of our admiration. Something that Alice absolutely has. Something, you are the apple of our eye, and the big apple.
Thank you. And Alice has done all of this with me. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Anthony. Okay, we're going to open it.
No, listen. Yes, of course. I want to thank you. Thank you for coming to the law school. Thank you for keeping this going, and I hope you'll be here long after Ross and Alice are here. And that we'll serve champagne and cake.
And we have so good
Well, now those of you, I looked at a tape of one of the breakfasts in the early 1990s, and I do exactly the same things. I even sound alike, I just look a little older. As we always do at these breakfasts, we like to give a product of the law school's intellectual life to our guest speakers. And so I have a little gift, only it's a little different this time. This is the 125th anniversary of New York Law School. And one of our important graduates in 1903 was Wallace Stevens. Now, he spent 50 years as an insurance lawyer, and he also is a poet. Now, I was going to give you his 50 years of his legal memos, but I decided instead to give you the collected works of Wallace Stevens, a graduate of New York Law School. So thank you all for participating in this.
Thank you, Ross.
What it says is, congratulations to Ross Sandler. You are what makes us New York Law School. Very sweet, and thank you, Anthony. Thank you. And now the cake. We're going to do, we've run over in time. It drives me nuts when we're over. I always like to end exactly at 9:30. I know people want to get to work. But we have a cake, and we're going to cut a cake. And you had champagne. What could be better than a champagne breakfast with cake?
There was a real debate about whether to do cake and champagne at 8:15 in the morning, and I said absolutely. So, it was not a question. So I salute Ross Sandler in the Center for New York City Law and Alice Sandler for her incredible co-anchoring of this program.
And come and join us for champagne and cake. Thank you all.